that this area was once known as the Valley of Heart's Delight. Has a place ever had a more evocative name? And has such a place as that ever suffered a fate as tragic as this one? And does enough of that place still exist? And is it important enough to justify its preservation? That, it seems to me, is the question facing you here today and in the coming years. It's a hackneyed cliche to say that agriculture is the one essential industry. AFT's signature tagline, "No farms, no food," sums it up as neatly as anything. But today we take our food for granted, at least in this country, thanks to the success of modern agriculture. So far, it's kept ahead of the Malthusian curve, producing increasing productivity that's staying ahead of the population growth, even though the farmland is increasingly being diverted to other uses. But can agriculture continue on this upward curve as the demand for food relentlessly continues to increase in the coming years? By mid-century, California's population of 38 million today is forecast to reach 50 million. The 320 million people in the United States are expected to grow to 420 million. And the 7.2 billion souls now on planet Earth will exceed 9 billion. Can tell you that this represents a 20% increase for the world, a 31% increase for the United States, and a 32% increase for California. We're going to need a lot more food. But a number of factors raise questions about agriculture's ability to meet this increasing demand. The current drought reminds us that water is scarce and getting more expensive as competition for it increases. Climate change appears to be affecting everything from the water supply to agricultural pests and the suitability of land for producing tree crops. And the technological innovations that have thus far enabled agriculture to increase productivity, fossil energy, fertilizers, biocides, and genetically modified organisms, are coming under increased public scrutiny because of their potential environmental and health impacts. This has led to more regulation of agriculture that farmers themselves consider to be the biggest obstacle to the sustainability of their businesses and of our food supply. In short, there's a growing tension between all-out food production and other very important social goods. And finding an appropriate balance, it seems to me, is the core of our challenge going forward. Finding that balance, however, will be increasingly difficult if agriculture has less and less land on which to produce our food in an environmentally responsible manner. Nationally, we lose about 1 million acres of farmland a year. Here in California, we've been paving over between 30 and 50,000 acres a year, more than 1 million total since they started keeping records back in 1984. Here in Santa Clara County, cropland has declined almost 80% from the 127,000 acres that existed in 1949 to around 23,000 acres today. And in just the last 30 years, Santa Clara has lost 40%, 47% of the land that remained at the beginning of that period. If you keep going at that rate, about 1,300 acres a year, all of the cropland in Santa Clara County will be gone within 20 years. And the remaining agricultural land in Santa Clara County provides many benefits that are pretty much irreplaceable to those of you who live and work here. For starters, those 23,000 remaining acres of cropland still produce $263 million worth of agricultural output every year. Adjusted for inflation, that's about 3/4 of the value that was produced back in 1949. Among them are two outstanding agriculture areas, the Coyote Valley and the Upper Pajaro Valley. Both are remnants of the Valley of Heart's Delight, emblematic of an agricultural heritage that is celebrated both here and nationwide. Both are critical aquifer recharge areas for San Jose and Gilroy, and the source of part of their water supply. Both are undeveloped floodplains that reduce the downstream flood risk in the urbanized areas of the county, as well as downstream in Watsonville. Both are important corridors for wildlife between the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Diablo Range on the east. And perhaps above all, they represent the potential of Santa Clara County to contribute to the healthy food movement and to the resilience of agriculture in the face of the uncertainties of climate change. Resources like this are very scarce, particularly in the Bay Area. When something becomes that scarce, its value increases. And the agricultural lands remaining in Santa Clara County are an invaluable resource, it seems to me, for future generations. 80% of what you once had is gone, but there's no need to pave over the rest of it. Future growth could easily be accommodated on a tiny fraction of the less productive land that still exists in this county, or better still, through urban infill and intensification of existing developed areas.
I have the statewide version of this map on the wall of my office. I stare at it all the time. And this is Santa Clara County Important Farmland 2012. But land conservation to me is center to my concerns and what I need to think with you about. And the help I need from you is, what do you see when you look at this? Now, I have my nose against the glass. I'm inured to, this is like trying to get a fish to see water. I see farmland, prime farmland of a kind that you cannot recreate, at least not in a million years, literally. It takes several more million years than that. I see enormous wealth generation. I see the center, an epicenter of wealth and well-being, not just in California, but the entire world. I see an enormous gravity well of intellectual capital. People come here, want to be here because of meaningful connection to well-being, wealth, production, the future. I see green stuff down here, 22,000 acres of which I understand you're here to talk about a little bit. But I'd like to hear, and I will stay the whole day, I will be listening to how you see what it is that's on this map. No matter what state you're in this country, fully appreciate that land is a capital asset. And it has improvements on it. It also has capital value as long as your asset classes are properly characterized and quantified. But if you don't count it, it doesn't count. One of the themes I think we can talk about today, and certainly has been one of my dominant themes, is we simply don't have the accounting strategy correct in how we look at farmland. We've also had inherent in our farmland conservation strategies an inside-out kind of thinking. The epicenter of concern is urban development, the great creeping green slime of urbanism, and the poor, defenseless farmland that simply is overwhelmed. And we are fighting in the last trenches, and we back up one more time to the sphere of influence line or wherever we have to go. I'm going to suggest to you that that has put us on a track of thinking that's not helpful right now. I want to suggest an outside-in strategy, that urban development is land development in all of its connections across the landscape at different scales. You are part of the brain trust of helping to rethink how we look at the capital asset of land. And in the middle of all that is the question of irreplaceable farmland or agricultural assets. But the larger question is, how do we shape the fundamental capital value of our landscape over time?
I'm really honored to be here today, and particularly thrilled to see LAFCO co-sponsoring this. One thing that's not in my bio in the written materials is that I had the honor of serving 2 years on LAFCO up in Sonoma County. I took the 2-year stint when special districts were very first put on LAFCO, representing resource conservation districts up there. So it was quite an experience, and I know the challenges of serving on LAFCO.
For the first time, we have a regional plan adopted by major land use authorities that sets a target, and it's a very unique and forward-thinking target for accommodating 100% of the region's growth till 2040 within the existing urban footprint. And I want to just highlight that as one of the boldest conservation strategies that any of us have ever tried to do. We've bought lots of easements. We've worked on urban growth boundaries. Greenbelt Alliance has fought for these things. But what we're saying is, these are flip sides of the same coin. How do we do this? In part, we say we will build inside our current boundary. That will relieve some of the pressure.
I see my work much like a tech leader sees a startup company, or an investor in venture capital sees what they're trying to do. I see my role in government is constantly evolving, taking the most cutting-edge research, policy, funding mechanisms, plagiarizing and creatively stealing from far-sighted organizations like SAGE and POST and the Nature Conservancy. There's no limits where it comes to innovation, and there's no reason government can't be leading the way instead of following. So we've been playing defense for too long. We've been relying on regulation. Regulation is the backstop. But after that, everything after that is possible.
This one shouldn't take very long for any of us to digest, if you'll pardon the pun, but ag is part of a food system, and our health element helps remind every one of us of that. The only thing I think this diagram should be updated for, since it was created, is that at the waste level cycle, there's an increasing awareness of recovery as a part of the food system, and I just wanted to mention that. But this is part of looking at our subject matter holistically rather than atomist.
I completely agree with this idea that we've been on the defense way too much on conserving lands, and it needs to be a more positive idea, and that open space needs to be discussed as an infrastructure element. Just like you get water, just like you get sewer, just like you get electricity, we need to start educating our population about, open space, working lands. Everything that our working lands does to us is part of our infrastructure investment. So I agree with everything that's been said.
I'm the executive director of California FarmLink, and we have been sort of rolling out on the ground economic development strategy for farmers in California, working with, since 1999 when the nonprofit started, but particularly accelerating that in the last 5 years or so as we've become a community development financial institution.
And my name is Pete Aiello. I'm currently the president of the Santa Clara County Farm Bureau. There's just relatively a handful of us guys left, us larger operators in the South County. And when I say handful, literally I'm talking about 5, maybe 10 operators down there who are operating on more than, just a few hundred acres. The small farmers are a very big part of the agricultural scene here in Santa Clara County. Agriculture has a very promising future. If we can continue to farm. Growing populations, not only in this area, but statewide, nationwide, worldwide. California is the horse when it comes to agriculture. We exceed the production and gross domestic product related to agriculture of nations, entire nations. If California were a standalone agricultural producer, we would outproduce, I think, all but 3 nations in the entire world. So very, very important to preserve agriculture here in California. And in no county out of the 50-plus counties in California is the spotlight hotter than on us growers here in Santa Clara County. I really wish I'd have grown up back in the day when this valley was still the Valley of Heart's Delight. Just a beautiful, beautiful place. And awesome climate, great soil, but then again, you look at the soils map that we looked at earlier, and you see there's not a whole lot of green on it. That's because all that red is there and taking up that soil. And so a lot of the discussion today has been about how do we preserve the land, and there's nothing more important than that. Obviously, it starts with that. You got to have the good soil. It's got to have water. That's another issue we'll talk about some other day. And we have to be able to farm in these prime areas in order to produce what we need to produce. And just my operation as an example, you know, we're one of the larger operations in the county, if not the state, and we have to beg and borrow ground every year. This year we had to borrow 200-300 acres from some of our fellow farmers because there is just no ground out there, no more prime land to get our hands on. If it's prime, and especially if it's got water, it's taken. And nobody's letting go of it anytime soon, as long as they're staying in business. So now we have to go out with our hat in our hand to our buddies who are also our competitors. You know, they need land too. And luckily we found a couple of guys who were willing to give us a little 30 acres here or 50 acres there. One guy gave us 100. They all need it back next year. You know, they just happen to have it available for this year alone. So we've had to go out there and literally beg and borrow ground to make sure our business stays viable, to make sure we can continue growing, and make sure we have a prosperous future ahead of us. And it's just really worrisome that not only are we unable to get more ground in this area, you know, once it goes urban, it's hard to reverse it from urban back to rural, but also we're fighting the onslaught of more development and more urbanization, shrinking that pool even more. So extremely important to protect what we still have, which is not a whole lot compared to a few decades ago.